He was one of the most beloved entertainers of our time. Hard to believe that John Denver died 25 years ago this week.
John Denver may have sung about home, mountains, and sunlight, but underneath his soothing voice and melodies lay a turbulent existence that extended well beyond the sky. On a bright October afternoon, the narrative of Denver, a city beloved by millions for its association with tranquility and the natural world, took an eerie twist. In those last seconds, what actually transpired? What made a single choice the catalyst for such a dramatic shift? As the layers are peeled back, the revelations are incredibly disturbing, not to mention tragic. Perhaps his worst mistake was also his biggest source of happiness. What is real? Now it's out there, and fans aren't happy about it. The regimented upbringing of John Denver, whose real name is Henry John Deutschendorf Jr., came from a U.S. Air Force family, with his father serving as a flight instructor and distinguished pilot, Lieutenant Colonel Henry John Deutschendorf Sr. As a regular part of his military life, John was always on the road, passing through states such as Arizona, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Alabama, and Texas. He remained cautious and timid for most of his childhood since he had a hard time making friends due to all the upheaval in his life. Nature and trips to his grandmother's farm in Oklahoma helped John cope with the isolation of his itinerant life. During these tranquil vacations, Johnny was exposed to traditional country music, a genre that would greatly impact his future songwriting. His other grandma gave him a vintage Gibson guitar for his 11th birthday, though, and it was the turning point in his early musical career. One act of compassion ignited a relationship to music that would last a lifetime. John then started to sing and play music, finding that performance allowed him to connect with others and come out of his shell. As a matter of fact, music evolved from a mere pastime into a vital component of daily existence. As a result of his difficult upbringing and academic struggles, John fled to California with the hopes of becoming a famous musician. He was so determined to make his own way in the music industry that his father had to fly out and get him before he even reached Fort Worth, Texas. Subsequently, John became a student of architecture at Texas Tech University, where he also honed his formidable musical abilities by performing occasional gigs with the Alpine Trio, a local folk band. During that time, John went from being a timid young Air Force recruit to becoming a beloved singer-songwriter all around the world. The guitar served as both a companion and a guide, leading him beyond his humble origins into an exciting future. John discovered his voice and his calling in music, which laid the emotional groundwork for a career that would go on to touch millions of people's lives and reverberate across radio waves and mountaintops. What happened next, though, would propel him well beyond his modest beginnings and bring him one step closer to becoming a name that history would never forget. John Denver's love of music had evolved from a hobby into a vocation by the time he was a teenager. In a daring move, he fled to California from Fort Worth, Texas, where he was growing restless and desiring a life free of scholastic and military constraints. Even though he had nothing more than a guitar and an idea, he still intended to become a famous musician. However, his adventure did not last long. His dad is a pilot in the Air Force, apprehended him without delay and returned him home by plane. Despite the failure, Denver's career would be defined by his ferocious desire and independence. Denver attended Lubbock's Texas Tech University to study architecture after coming home and finishing high school. But music quickly became more important to him than his academic achievements. He started taking his performances more seriously and finding his own musical voice when he joined a folk group in town called the Alpine Trio. He played more and more shows at small places, solidifying his belief that a traditional professional path wasn't his calling. He was more drawn to the thriving folk culture of the 1960s, influenced by Pete Seeger and the new singer-songwriter movement than he was to blueprints and drafting tables. Denver decided he wanted to devote his life to music, so he left college and moved to Los Angeles. That was the turning point that finally allowed him to break into the professional world. Denver replaced Chad Mitchell in the Chad Mitchell Trio, which became Denver, Boise, and Johnson after their reunion. He was able to get expertise and exposure in the business thanks to the tour's nostalgic vibe and folk-oriented repertoire. Since Deutschendorf was too difficult to market, several industry lawyers recommended that he change his stage name. So, he changed his name to John Denver, in tribute to the capital of Colorado, a city he loved for its natural splendor and independent spirit. John Denver's rise to fame started with a song he wrote while he was alone. During a long and lonely layover in Washington, D.C., he picked up his guitar and wrote what he originally called "Babe, I Hate to Go." The lyrics, which were touching and conveyed the pain of separation, eventually became "Leaving on a Jet Plane." Although the song didn't do well when he performed it solo, it became a smash hit in 1969 when the popular folk trio Peter, Paul, and Mary recorded it. Not only did their cover reach #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, but it also gave Denver his first taste of mainstream acclaim as a songwriter and established his credentials in the business. After getting his foot in the door, John Denver continued to gain momentum as a solo artist. "Take Me Home, Country Roads" was written by him, Bill Danoff, and Taffy Nivert in 1971. An anthem for country living was born from the simple, touching chorus, which resounded in homes across the country. Despite the emphasis on West Virginia in the lyrics, the actual back roads to explore lay in the hills of neighboring Maryland. Despite that little change, West Virginians adopted the song as their de facto state slogan. Denver's soft voice, simple melody, and profound homesickness elevated the record to a watershed point in his rise to fame. After enduring the hardships of the 1970s, he unleashed a torrent of popular songs like "Rocky Mountain High," "Sunshine on My Shoulders," "Annie's Song," and "Thank God I'm a Country Boy." Among these, the 10-minute composition "Annie's Song," a love song dedicated to his first wife, Annie Martell, became a smashing success in the United States and the United Kingdom. With its incorporation of Denver's deep connection to Colorado's natural splendor, "Rocky Mountain High" became a cherished Colorado state anthem in 2007. His songs capture the essence of American landscapes, honesty, and nature. John Denver had a deep passion for flying even before he became a famous musician. This devotion would last a lifetime and, sadly, contribute to his demise. His father, Lieutenant Colonel Henry John Deutschendorf Sr., was a distinguished pilot and flight instructor in the United States Air Force, thus he grew up among planes. Military aircraft. Denver is no stranger to the aviation industry. He spent his childhood in close proximity to military facilities and airfields. His father inculcated in him a reverence for the science and art of flight by imparting the principles of piloting and inspiring him with tales of flying. Denver had become a highly competent private pilot by the mid-70s, with qualifications in multi-engine land flight operations, single-engine sea flight operations, and single-engine land flight operations. Skill, accuracy, and nerve were also qualities he sought in other types of flying, such as aerobatics and glider piloting. Denver was famous for its engine-out glides, which it often performed over the Colorado Rocky Mountains near Aspen. He displayed his confidence and extensive technical knowledge of flying with these stunts, which were also a part of his daring personality. He flew much more than the average weekend warrior, clocking up over 20,700 hours in the air. From multiple Cessna 210s to a Kristen Eagle aerobatic plane, he possessed a fleet of planes. Like his music, flying was his life's work. Friends noted that he was most at ease behind the controls of his private jet. which he used to fly from concert to gig. Performing impromptu gliding displays following his attendance at a gliding school was one instance when his comfort level in the air was close to danger. John Denver's tremendous desire for space travel was hidden under his world-renowned songs and love of nature. Space, in Denver's eyes, was the last frontier, embodying the same sense of wonder and adventure that had inspired his music and flight throughout his life. He had always been an avid student of astronomy and physics. Denver saw a chance to merge his creative vision with scientific accomplishment in the 80s, when NASA introduced the Teacher in Space program, and he also got to see space flight up close. He had grand ambitions beyond those of a normal passenger. He wanted to compose and play music while in space, and he wanted the world to hear his unique perspective. Denver took and passed the stringent psychological and physical tests required by NASA for civilian spaceflight because he was so committed to making this goal a reality. As the Space Shuttle Challenger prepared to launch its first civilian into space, he emerged as a front-runner among the contenders. His impeccable reputation, extensive flying experience, and widespread renown made him the perfect spokesperson for increasing public interest in space. He had all the right stuff, but in the end, the program didn't accept him. New Hampshire high school teacher Krista McAuliffe, whose involvement was more in line with the program's pedagogical objectives, was instead bestowed the honor. For Denver, it was a crushing letdown right there. He intended to compose a piece while in orbit and use his unique location to inspire people's imaginations. It was a stroke of luck that probably spared Denver's life, but he was nevertheless disappointed. The Space Shuttle Challenger disaster on January 28, 1986, killed all 7 crew members, including McAuliffe, when it broke apart 73 seconds after liftoff. A re-evaluation of civilian space missions was prompted by the incident, which horrified the country. As an aerospace enthusiast and someone who had been so near to joining that tragic crew, Denver felt a pang of sadness at the time. A Long EZ was one of the unusual planes that John Denver bought in 1997 because of his love of flying. Bert Rutan, an aerospace engineer, created this experimental home-built plane. Its aerodynamics, fuel economy, and futuristic canard shape made it stand out. The aircraft quickly captivated Denver, who is constantly enthralled by innovation and performance. He was excited to put his stamp on the Long EZ, which he bought from a builder in Texas for $56,000, so he planned to have it customized with a unique paint job and registration, N555JD. As a lifetime aviation enthusiast, Denver saw the plane as a symbol of a new frontier. Despite the plane's great looks and performance, even seasoned pilots found it challenging due to its peculiarities and dangers. Among the most peculiar features of the Long EZ was the placement of its fuel selection valve, an essential part for transferring gasoline between tanks, which was situated below the pilot's left shoulder. In conventional planes, the fuel valve is right there, but in the Long EZ, the pilot had to twist their body, take off their harness, and take their focus off the flight path simply to switch fuels. Some Long EZ pilots had reported near accidents due to difficulties switching tanks mid-flight. Thus, this annoying and perhaps deadly design fault has been a source of concern for a long time. Denver was aware of the discomfort caused by the valve's inconvenient positioning and had started making plans to move the control to a better, safer area. During a pre-sale test flight in late September 1997, he and a trained instructor gave the plane a full rundown, including takeoff, refueling, and slow flying. No matter what the plane did, Denver knew he had to keep an eye on the fuel system. Still, he flew to the skies solo not long after finishing his last show in Corpus Christi, Texas, boosted by enthusiasm for his new plane. Clear skies, light breezes, and perfect flying conditions greeted the sky on October 12, 1997. as it began near the central coast of California. John Denver was filled with anticipation as he landed at the Monterey Peninsula Airport that afternoon. He was all smiles as he suited up in green trousers, a colorful sweater, and cowboy boots, ready to take off solo in his brand-new Long Easy aircraft. He had flown it with a trainer the day prior, going through gentle maneuvers and landing drills. After their successful test flight, Denver felt confident enough to go to the skies on their own. Concerns persisted despite his excitement, the most pressing of which was the fuel selector valve, which was situated behind his left shoulder and was notoriously difficult to reach. Denver conducted the usual pre-flight check before to take off. Records and subsequent reports indicate that he saw that the gasoline level in the right tank was below half full, while the left tank was around 25% full. He intended to swap tanks in the middle of flight, but doing so would require him to turn on the autopilot, which would free up his hands to reach back and adjust the dial. Denver was given the go-ahead to do 3 touch-and-go landings, which are standard procedures for assessing aircraft handling and acclimating pilots, at around 5:12 p.m. He asked the control tower for permission to depart from the pattern and fly about the region after the landings were completed, and they allowed it. At 5:27 p.m., Denver was requested to confirm his transponder code in order to reaffirm his stance. "Can you see it now?" "Around that moment," he inquired. Tragically, that was the final word he spoke before everything went wrong. According to eyewitnesses on the ground, the plane took off at around 500 feet, abruptly pitched up its nose, and plummeted into the Pacific Ocean close to Pacific Grove. Prior to the plane hitting the sea, several people heard what sounded like a pop or a backfire. There was complete stillness when the pilot lost control during what may have been relatively simple flying changes. There was no mayday signal, no sign of mechanical failure. It was one of the most horrifying situations a pilot could possibly face. At 5:28 p.m., precisely 1 minute following his last radio message to the control tower, the disaster took place. Responders were there in a matter of minutes, but by then it was too late. Denver was killed instantaneously by various blunt force injuries as the plane almost disintegrated upon impact. This supported the testimony of eyewitnesses who saw the plane fly dangerously low, as there was 30 feet of water around the crash site. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, determined that Denver probably lost control of the plane when he was reaching awkwardly to switch fuel tanks. He could have accidentally pressed down on the yoke or rudder and sent the plane into a deadly plunge. Even though John Denver had a reputation for being a kind guy and writing songs about nature, his personal life showed a darker side, especially when it came to his connection with flying. Denver lost his pilot's license in the early 1990s due to a combination of personal and legal issues. His drunk driving practices came under public spotlight after his 1993 arrest for DUI. Probation, a fine, and a guilty plea were the outcomes of this case. His reputation and record were further tarnished when, in 1994, he reportedly drove under the influence once more and smashed his Porsche into a tree, significantly tarnishing his position with aviation authorities. As a result of these occurrences, the FAA decided to examine Denver's medical clearance to fly. In order to get their pilot's license, candidates must demonstrate that they are in good mental and physical health, as per FAA criteria. In 1995, Denver told his doctor that he only had 2 or 4 beers while flying, but the FAA still wasn't persuaded. The revocation of his medical certificate occurred in March 1997, 7 months before to the tragic incident, due to his inability to complete follow-up obligations and concerns about his past substance use. As a pilot in charge of an aircraft, Denver was legally unable to operate without that certification. Regardless, he persisted in soaring. On October 12, 1997, he blatantly disregarded FAA restrictions by opting to fly the long EZ. This brings up serious issues about the enforcement of regulations and the risk-taking mindset commonly linked to private aviation. Among his pals, Denver was known as a daredevil for his penchant for extreme stunt flying, including engineless glider flights and perfect landings in hazardous environments. Other people, especially other pilots, thought these stunts were too dangerous, while others saw them as demonstrations of skill and confidence. Ultimately, toxicology results conducted after the accident cleared him of any intoxicating chemicals, but it didn't put the past regulatory infractions and dangerous actions that lead up to the accident out of his mind. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, investigated the circumstances surrounding the incident that killed John Denver in great detail. One of the initial conclusions was that impairment was not a role since Denver was not impaired by drugs or alcohol when the accident occurred. Problems with mechanics and flying conditions were the next areas of investigation. The unusual location of the fuel selecting valve on board the plane was the main cause. The long EZ had a unique and potentially dangerous arrangement with its selector positioned behind the pilot's left shoulder, as opposed to the standard position in conventional aircraft. The pilot had to take their right hand off the control stick, unbuckle their shoulder strap, rotate their body left by 90 degrees, reach behind their seat, and turn a valve in order to change fuel tanks while in flight. In addition to being physically uncomfortable, this procedure took the pilot's focus away from flying safely, which is especially risky while flying alone or at low altitudes. Even though Denver knew the valve was in the wrong spot, he had started to relocate it. Unfortunately, his last flight did not finish this alteration. His fuel tanks were low when he took off, and investigators believe he planned to switch them out in flight to increase his flying duration. In a confined cockpit, the necessary movement for the valve switching maneuver might easily induce a disruption in the aircraft's attitude or unintentional rudder input, according to simulations conducted inside a long EZ. A catastrophic nose-down spiral ensued because the pilot's attention being diverted by his effort to manipulate the fuel selector handle, the National Transportation Safety Board said, causing the pilot to lose focus and cause the plane to crash. The tragic and illuminating discovery that was John Denver's death in 1997 was more than that. A complicated and sometimes conflicting personal life was revealed in the aftermath of the disaster, as millions of people mourned the death of a beloved folk star. At times, Denver's well-documented passion for flying has become irresponsible. The pilot who routinely flew without the necessary medical clearance and executed engine-off glider maneuvers gave the impression that he was not afraid to push boundaries, sometimes carelessly. His refusal to comply with FAA orders, even after receiving many warnings and having his medical certificate withdrawn, brought into doubt the fairness of regulatory oversight and the concept of individual responsibility. Flight with low fuel, flying an aircraft with known design faults, and flying solo without a flight plan were all factors that contributed to the tragedy. These decisions contributed to his overall pattern of recklessness, which culminated in his tragic disaster. Despite the lack of any drugs in his system, his image had already taken a hit due to his history of drunk driving charges and a 1994 collision. His untimely demise cast doubt on the idyllic, outdoorsy reputation he had worked so hard to establish for Denver in the eyes of the general public. Nevertheless, Denver's impact has remained strong even after all these setbacks. Messages of peace, environmental responsibility, and emotional authenticity in his music have an enduring impact on listeners all around the globe. American folk and country music continues to use songs such as Rocky Mountain High, Annie's Song, and Take Me Home, Country Roads as mainstays. Long before eco-consciousness became popularity, he was already one of the most prominent painters to include it into his work. His dedication to the topics he advocated for in his music was evident in his humanitarian activity, which included establishing the WinStar Foundation and collaborating with organizations like UNICEF. All things considered, John Denver is more revered for his life and legacy than for his death. He was posthumously honored with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 2014, and 2 of his children were there to witness the ceremony. At Red Rocks Amphitheater, you can see a 15-foot bronze statue of him on a daily basis. It depicts him with a guitar slung over his shoulder and an arm reaching towards a flying eagle, representing his profound connection to the natural world and music. I appreciate you tuning in. Please let us know what you think by clicking the like button and leaving a comment below if this article made you think. If you want to hear more in-depth analyses of legendary musicians and their hidden history, you should subscribe. Also, go ahead and click the video that's next to this one if you're ready for another riveting tale.